to the Syncom Smalltalk tutorial series. This morning what we'd like to take a look at is the debugger in Syncom Smalltalk, and that means both Object Studio and VisualWorks. The debugger is the same in both products, so what I'm showing today is in VisualWorks, but it'll be equivalent in Object Studio whether it's on Windows or in VisualWorks on any platform. So with that out of the way, let's get rid of this title screen and we'll go over to the product. Now what I'm using for an example is this little counter app that I built in one of the previous screencasts when we walked through how to use the browser. So with that in mind, what we have here is we're creating a new counter and we're going to debug by right-clicking here and selecting Debug It. So that's one way of doing this. I could also just go to Smalltalk, Debug It, and do the same thing with the highlighted code. Now this gets us to the debugger. Let me make this full screen so that it's the maximal thing you can see. And what we've got up here is the stack. By the stack, it means everything that's been executing so far in this particular thread of control. So we started off down here with the performing of the method, which means we were in the workspace just performing the method, and we're now in here. So if I look up here, I have various levels of control that I can execute things. I can go here and step into a message send. I can go here and just step, meaning execute. So the two differences between that is if I just do step, it means execute this line of code. If I step into, it means jump in there and see what the code looks like. I'll show that in a moment. Up here, step into or step over blocks, meaning I'm going to execute a block and just keep going past it. Over here, we have restart execution from the beginning of the context, which basically means let's make like this didn't happen and start over. Here we have continue, which basically means just run this as if I had not gone into the debugger and let's just see what happens. This is one of the more useful ones here, run this context and run to caret. Run to caret means I could put the cursor here and say let's run and keep going until that point. So if I do this, it gets me down to the next piece of execution. So it ran everything between there and where I had the cursor, and it's just at the next thing it would execute next. Up here, I have jumped to the caret without executing any code. So if there was a problematic piece of code that I did not want to execute, but I wanted to jump down to something else, maybe I'd set up a bunch of state, which I can do. I've shown you how to do that with the inspectors. I could set up a bunch of state, and then I could just skip a whole bunch of code I don't want to execute. Finally, over here, we have return from this context. So let's just jump back to where we were called from. I can pause the current debug operation, or I can terminate. Normally, you don't need to use terminate, but if the debugger gets stuck, this button is usually active, and you can terminate and get rid of the window, something you might need to use in emergency type situations. Down here we have inspectors. So here I have anything that I can inspect that I'm looking at. So notice this says unbound method, and that's because I'm in the workspace. If I jump into this, so I'm going to look at the add one, now I notice I have my object, the counter, and the current count is 0. So I have an inspector on these, and up here I can see the state of the objects as I was stepping through things. And you can see I have a breakpoint right there, so apparently at some point I set a breakpoint here. So if I step, I'm going past that. Now I'm in +1. I can't jump into this because plus is kind of a primitive-ish method in Smalltalk. Notice what happens if I try to jump into it, it doesn't do it. The compilers kind of optimize that out for me. So that's how that works. If on the other hand I step into this, you'll notice I go into the count : method. And notice the way the stack's been lining up. I've been looking at everything that I've been doing, and I'm right back in all of these methods. I can come back down here though, and I could say, let's go to the add one method, and let's say I change this to +10. So I'm going to accept this, and one thing you'll notice is the browser window down here, this is a browser window. I can accept this code, and I'm going to say remove the breakpoint that I had there. I could have kept it if I'd liked, and notice what happened to my stack. The stack actually went ahead and reset itself, so that's how that operates. Notice up here I have a bunch of menus. I've already walked through some of these down here. Let's go up here to the menus, stack, copy the stack report. This is very important for things where you're trying to report a bug, especially back to Syncom. If you've run into a problem using the tool and you need to report a bug back to your vendor or to another support team within your organization, if I copy that, and let's make this smaller again just to show you what's going to go on, I'll open up a new page and let's paste this, and then I'll make this bigger. So you see I've got my entire context stack, so everything that happened up to this point in here. Very useful for reporting. It's something you'll often see when stacks get dumped when a program crashes in Smalltalk itself. This is what you'll get. This is something your vendor or support team will really want to see. Let's go back to the debugger. Over here, method, I get browse. I can do senders and implementers, so I can do the senders and implementers of add one, get another window up on that. I can go down here to show containing package, so I can see where this belongs. Counter app, it'll show me who owns that thing. And then recompile with full blocks. That just means that it's going to recompile the whole thing for me, so I can recompile from the menu, or of course I can just hit Apple S here on the Mac or Control S on Windows. Edit, I have a bunch of things I can offer here. All the standard browser options are right there. And under Execute, I can do all the things that are up on the toolbar. So if I'd rather use the menus, notice there are also shortcuts for keys. If you get used to these, you can hit these function keys instead of having to walk through the menus or the toolbar. And then finally over here on the correct menu, this is interesting. We're going to walk through this in another screencast when we go through more debugging usage. So we're going to introduce a bug into this application and then kind of walk through the whole tool, and we'll walk through that there. So I'll get to that in a future screencast. So that should pretty much walk you through all the panes. The main difference down here is, notice that I have an inspector here, and over here I have another inspector. And you might wonder, why is that? Well, let's put a temp variable, so we'll call that temp, and then we'll say temp : equal, say, the string foo. We'll put a period, compile that. It's not used, but we'll say proceed. And I did that simply to show you this is another inspector for any temporaries or method arguments that came in. So that's how that works, is you've got the inspector for temps and method arguments, and the inspector over here for all your attributes, so the instance variables for your object. And that pretty much gives you a high-level overview of the debugger. Again, we'll go into more detail on actual usage in a debugging situation in a future screencast. So that's about it for today. Until next time, have fun with Syncom Smalltalk.